This is Honest Neighbour, a podcast about real estate, Oxford County, and everything in between. Okay, good. Welcome to the Honest Neighbour podcast. Thank you for tuning in.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. What language is that, Neil?
It's just like a greeting, usually Russian or
I think it's Ukrainian, isn't it?
They use it all. It's all over there.
Interesting.
Just like I don't know. I just diverted. People say it when on the
My
ship.
roommate was Ukrainian, and he used to always say...
See, the Russian guys and the Polish guys on the ships that I worked on in the Bahamas and New Zealand,
like when you
they would
drink.
always say when they
Nastrovia.
drink. Nastrovia.
Nastrovia?
Nastrovia.
Nastrovia. I'll practice
I don't know.
it.
The only reason I like it is because I have that voice that, like, because I used to mess with people, and I go around and pretend to sing the Russian national anthem, and they'd say, "You know what? Those words are completely wrong, but you sound very good singing."
So somebody that's not Russian would believe that you are Russian.
Well, they'd say you should be Russian, but you're not saying the right words.
It's like the Chinese tattoo.
Yeah, it's like
Oh my gosh.
How
When
many
someone's
people
like,
I have no idea what it says, but it looks cool.
Lunch.
Oh my
Number
gosh.
6 on the menu.
oh my goodness. See, I can actually speak French, but I do not sound French when I speak. So there's no mistaking that it is a very poor second language of mine.
People come in to your open house to try and speak French to try and trick you or anything like that?
Not French
I think that's so
specifically.
rude.
Definitely other languages, but I do agree. I think if you're going to speak in another language in front of somebody deliberately so they don't know what you're saying, that's rude. If
Sorry,
you're
I
just-
want to clarify. I don't think that people who speak other languages are rude. I just think when they can speak English and they're like
They do
talking as a couple to each other
Yeah.
in their native language and they know I'm like can't understand what they're saying, I think that's kind of rude. When you're in
When
an
someone
open
does it
house.
deliberately, it's rude.
Oh, these
Yeah.
were people that were my age in the house. They were English speaking, okay? They weren't French. And they just switched to French because it came to pricing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I was standing there.
Yeah.
And I don't work with them, but the same thing. It just to automatically launch into it seemed
I think
kind
if I
of
was,
a little
exclusionary.
bit rude.
I think if I was going to do that, I would actually maybe say to the agent, "We're just going to have a private conversation. Pardon us for a minute." I think if you did that and then spoke in whatever language you felt like speaking in, so that they couldn't understand you, that's totally fine. But to be I've had people in conversation with me switch to another language so that I don't know what they're saying.
And then hop back in.
And
Yeah.
I don't get the point of that, really. Just let's
the
just
point is
say,
that
hey,
you
need a
won't
second.
know what they're
and-
saying.
That's where it's awesome if you mess with them, because I was selling a stereo once and it was a Dutch family and I don't know a lot of Dutch. Okay, but they started talking Dutch about the television or whatever I was showing them, and I didn't know what to say, but I knew they were talking Dutch, and it bugged me. So I said, "Hoe oud is your dochter?" Which means, "How old is your daughter?" Because she was, and that's all I knew how to say though. But they heard me.
Wait,
speak
that's the
Dutch.
only thing you know how to say in Dutch, is how old is your daughter?
It is. I got taught. I dated a girl who had Dutch parents, and I
my
thought
goodness.
that's a good thing. The only thing I know how to say in Czech is "give me a kiss." De me pusu, right?
Oh my
so,
gosh.
like, you
That's
have
so
to,
funny.
Anyway, so I said that, and they were horrified because they thought that I understood everything that they said, right? And that's the only
Yes.
reason I did it.
I have
think-
eavesdrop. Oh, no,
Sorry, I think the maddest I ever got in an open house, and there's context to this, but I was hosting an open house I'll just tell the story. I was hosting an open house at a very well-priced listing, entry level, busy market. And as I was pulling into my open house, like just putting the signs up, like getting set up, I get a text from my wife. Oh no, sorry, it was from a friend of mine. And my youngest son was at a birthday party. And the text read, yeah, Liam, my son, just broke his arm and it looks really bad. He's on his way to the hospital. And I'm like, holy crap. Like,
Oh my God.
this is really bad. Okay. And then I get a text from the person who's hosting the open house. And he says, Liam broke his arm. He's on his way to the hospital. I don't think it's major. Your wife's with him. Like, Amanda's with him. I'm like, okay. So now I'm simultaneously like, all right, I'm panicking. And this is one of those open houses where there's already 8 people at the door at 10 minutes to the start of the open house. And you're like, oh my gosh. So I was kind of freaking out. I immediately went like, I need help. I can't do this open house. I'm not doing my sellers any service by being here. I'm very stressed out about this. I need to go be with my son, right? But you can't just hang a canceled sign. First of all, I didn't have one with me. You can't just lock the door and leave. So I text around. I don't know if you were with the office then, but I started making calls and posting on the Facebook. Like, we didn't have the group chat then. Anyway, Carrie Montgomery, who's amazing, came and bailed me out at the open house so I could go to the hospital. But before that happened, it was 45 minutes or so that I was managing this stressful open house. And one person came in and absolutely carved the house. And I was so mad about all the things that were going on. I told her to leave. I said, if you don't like the house, just leave. It's no problem. I'm not be offended. She was. When I said that, fine, okay, I burned that bridge, whatever. There was never really a bridge there to begin with, but and then the second, like, a couple came in, and I think they were Polish or Eastern European, and they were speaking to me in English, and then they just started, like, what we just talked about, speaking to each other in Polish, and I don't know, I didn't say anything or do anything about it, but when we started having that conversation, it made me remember that very stressful open house, and like how antagonistic that felt to me in that moment, that they would just start speaking a different language right in front of me while we're having a conversation.
The only time I've ever kicked somebody out was
that was the end of my story. But anyway.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
The only time I ever kicked anybody out of an open house, well, like it actually said leave, was somebody speaking another language.
Oh, really?
It was not because they were speaking another language. It was just they were being rude in my open house. Okay, I had an open house with people coming through.
This was the same thing. Like, this woman was picky about everything, carving everything, and there's other people around who maybe are in a different socioeconomic situation, and this was all they could afford. They're not buying down; they're trying to buy their first house. So, first houses often have imperfections.
Absolutely.
And we have to, like, balance our own needs as buyers and homeowners with the what things cost. And to just come and crap all over everything, it's ruining it for the 12 other people that are trying to take a look at that property at that moment.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I feel I was within my rights to my seller, who I'm trying to represent, and saying, why don't you just go? You don't have to stay here. Just go. It's fine. And that did not go well because, again, I have kind of a big voice and a big person, a large stature. Stature, yeah. Large stature. And I didn't throw her out, but I just suggested somewhat aggressively that she leave.
I have asked
It did
people,
not go well.
So I stopped letting people into open houses when they wouldn't sign in. And they would give me a fake name. Like, it's very clearly they're ready. Like, I am Berenstein Bear. That actually did happen. Because, and depending on, especially, a vacant house is a little bit different, but this is someone's home you are asking to enter. You do not have an inherent right to enter that house. Right. And I think the week before, there had actually been a theft at an open house from someone in our office. And so it was just a really good reminder that...
Someone in your office stole from an open house?
No.
Desperate times.
No,
Desperate times.
Someone went through an open house and stole a bunch of jewelry. They thought probably was valuable. It was costume jewelry. But it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. They stole something.
That doesn't matter.
So from that point forward, I actually asked for ID in entering open houses. Show me your ID and that it matches you. And I had a lot of pushback from someone, and I said, you don't have to, or I basically said, this is someone else's home. I need to know who you are for both the sellers and for my own safety. If you don't want to enter that, or if you don't want to give me that, that's fine, but then you can't enter. And they gave a little pushback. And then I said, you know what? If I was doing an open house at your house, wouldn't you expect and hope that I would do the same for you? Yeah. That you would want to know after the fact if something had gone missing or there was a problem, who had actually gone through. And they relented. I got their ID. They came through. And I think I understand when buyers don't want to give that information. Yep. And it comes from really pushy agents at open house that then use that information to essentially harass them after. Yep. So I flat out say to people, look, I will not contact you if you do not wish to be contacted. Yep. But for my sellers and myself, I'd like to know exactly who's here. Yep. But I have asked people to leave that wouldn't give me that information.
Could you imagine how bad it would look as the listing agent if something went missing and they're like, who came through? And you went, I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, it says here, Berenstein Bear lives at a honey tree.
Did you actually have that on a sign-in sheet?
I did when I went back through sign-in sheets once, and that actually was another reminder of like, okay, no, I can do a better job as an agent of making sure of who's going through that. I had someone else once too that wanted to see a vacant house in the country, and they unrepresented. I didn't know them, and I said, just before I can confirm that showing for you, I'd like to confirm your identity. Can you, send a copy of your driver's license or a mortgage approval or something? And they're like, I'm not giving you that information. I'm like, that's fine, but I'm not taking you to see this house by myself in the country without that. And I ended up finding out that they asked another agent in my office to do the same thing on a different listing that was totally different style, different price point. So my spidey senses, I believe, were correct because it wasn't like they were asking to look for another country property. They were asking to look at another vacant property.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Did you have bare arms that day?
Oh, probably. It's those damn bare arms.
The only time that I kicked
asking to be
somebody out
assaulted.
was somebody yapping in another language, though. They kept going from room to room inside my open house while people were going around it talking, and every time I would follow them to the room, because if somebody's in an open house and they're not going upstairs by themselves or whatever,
Yeah.
if they split, then I'm going to follow the ones that's going into the room that has
The most valuable things.
yeah. So, and I've been told off by following people before, but this guy, every time I followed him into a room, he would keep talking on the phone. He would look at me, and then he'd walk into a different room so that I wasn't near him, right? But that room might have other people, and he was being loud on the phone.
Right.
So I just went up to him and I snapped and I pointed and I said, "Take it outside."
You did the snap.
Yeah. And he came back in and apologized.
Oh,
After.
well, that's
that's
good. That's
good.
kind of a happy ending to that.
So,
Totally.
like,
but
Sorry.
Sorry, that's fine. I have clients I've been working with right now who they are shopping in another market, not here in Woodstock, but they're with another agent. Doesn't matter. But they were attending an open house on the last weekend. And he was like it was busy, and they already knew they wanted to write an offer on this property. And he was pulling the, like, I'm going to carve every feature of this and make sure that no one else in this open house is interested in this house.
So I
Sounded like it worked. Sorry, it sounded like it worked for him because they did end up securing the property.
people do that.
Yeah,
when they're
man,
gonna go
it's
off, they go
crazy.
back to the open
Yes.
house beforehand.
I do get
Shopping.
that strategy, but I have also said to people in open houses before or at showings, please remember this is someone's home.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
It's okay if it's not the right home for you. And we can talk about it a little bit more later. But while you are in someone else's home, be respectful of the fact that you are a guest in their space.
Yeah.
So don't knock their choices. I do often say, look, maybe not a paint color I would choose, but to each their own. Or
Everybody, I'll shop with you and I'll knock it with you. Not like Kelly. I'm not going to tiptoe through the tulips. Let's call a spade a spade.
It's interesting because I think
I'm
I'm
just
actually
kidding.
known, like, amongst my clients as being pretty brutally honest about my
Yeah,
thoughts on
yeah.
things. But I also really do when I'm actually physically in that home, because the seller may be watching and listening.
Yeah.
So I like to wait till I get outside to be like, oh my gosh, we are not buying that.
Did you
Did
see
you
blank?
see? Yeah, and sometimes it's justifiable.
Have you ever seen a
criticism.
camera blinker going?
No.
Recording you inside out?
No.
Yeah, you can see like, oh, look, I see ya.
Oh yeah.
Do you wave?
Sometimes.
Like, hi.
Hey, how you doing?
Baby monitors. I always wave at baby monitors when we're in a room with a crib. I'm like, oh hey, they're checking us right now, guys. Take a little
man.
wave. I will say the one thing I said recently in a house was, "Ooh, they should have emptied the diaper bin before their showings today." And we were in the kids' room, and then I actually thought to myself, "Oh, they are listening." But this is good advice
That's
for them.
not the worst thing that a person
Yeah,
could say.
No.
yeah, no.
I mean,
not
they
at
might have been
all.
running around like chickens with their heads cut off right before you're showing and just forgot that part. So I mean,
Yeah.
it happens, right?
And I think most people's comments typically aren't necessarily, they're not necessarily like making fun of the house. Oftentimes it's that they think the price is not reflective of the condition, right? So it's like they're not necessarily saying, "Oh, this is a terrible house." They're saying,
I think it's terrible houses.
No, it can be. 'Cause it depends how you grew up too, right? And what you saw. And then so sometimes people are exposed to things and then they see stuff and they just don't understand that people live like that. Have you been ever through a house and be like, oh my goodness?
Yeah.
I certainly have.
Oh, I've
I'm
been-
like, how do you
yeah.
let your children crawl on the floor?
Like, yeah,
I
a
have-
lot, yeah.
I have been in houses where I literally went home, shut the garage door, took all my clothes off, put them in a bag, and then like transferred them right to the laundry.
Pam does that.
Yeah, I've been in a few like that. Actually, I sent Ben to one inadvertently while I was gone on vacation. I sent Ben to a listing appointment, and he called and said that was the single most disgusting
It's the
house
worst
I've
house
been
I've ever
in.
been
Oh,
in.
Pam
Yeah.
will stop me from walking in our house. She'll be like, I want your socks off here before you're coming in any further.
Holy.
Oh, yeah, she doesn't want any of the contaminants. Like, she has the little
Yeah.
sock slippers
Does
that
she?
she'll wear. Like, just their little...
Yeah,
they're
no,
not
I know. Like the
disposable
like the
ones.
home
With little
inspector
booties.
wears.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this little,
Yeah.
she has all that stuff because
Pam's
she
a
does
smart
not
woman.
want all
that one, Kelly, that you sent me through. Oh my gosh.
I think your concern was also that there was multiple children living in a house
there was.
with
I
feces.
actually had an ethical dilemma whether or not something should have been said about that house with the kids
That's
living in basic squalor. Like, we don't have any. There's no like legislative requirements for us to report that kind of stuff, but it was one of those situations where, like, do I say something? And I think I talked it over with my wife.
To whom?
I don't know how that works.
Well, I know it, like, when you're a teacher, like, because my wife is in the education, and when there's some requirements that when they suspect abusive situations, like, they're required to report that to the Children's Aid Society, etc., and they take over. But as realtors, I don't think that we.
But this wasn't.
I don't really know.
Well, and this wasn't a situation of abuse. This is a situation where you believe that the children were living in a house filled with feces.
So there was actual animal feces all over the basement. Like, they just used the basement as there was at least two dogs, large dogs, and it was one of these houses that had like I don't want to give it away. Well, whatever. It had like a basement walk up. So there's a door from the lower basement out into the yard.
It's on the west end, right?
No, it's the east or the north or maybe the south or maybe it's not even in Woodstock, Neil. So the dogs would just poo like right on the floor.
Yeah.
And there's puddles of urine on the floor in the Now, granted, no, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say, like, it was unfinished, but there was part of the basement that was finished, and it appeared to be a playroom, and there was excrement all over the place, and it was the grossest.
I thought you were going somewhere else with that. Mind you, there was excrement, there was urine, but it's sterile.
But that's a great question. Are we obligated to report things like that?
I think we should look into that.
So,
and if anyone has
should.
any comments about that, please feel free to share them with us.
I remember they taught us about we were supposed to tell people if there were grow-ups and stuff in school. And I asked the teacher that. I said, well, what do? Do you go around and look for 600-watt high-pressure sodium bulbs, or what's going on? Right? How are you supposed to,
Not that we know anything about that. So we had a topic we were going to chat about today. We got a little off the rails already, like we do.
That's okay.
We were going to speak a little bit about misleading things in listings. I posed a question in a real estate forum a couple weeks ago, maybe. So what I've noticed is that sometimes listing agents will do a sky replacement on their listing photos. Usually it's the main photo. And my question, and I think it's more relevant in recreational properties where you want to buy a cottage that has afternoon sun, or you want to see the sunset. So, your frontage is extremely important to your enjoyment of the property. And it doesn't take a physicist to figure out, if you're looking at a photo, which direction the sun is based on the clouds and the lighting. And if agents are doing this sky replacement business, is that like misleading?
I think it's misleading.
And the comments in the forum varied from like, you're being over dramatic about this to, it's absolutely misleading. But it ultimately ended up being that it's buyer beware, and the buyer's agent needs to do their homework. If the sunset is important, that would be so-called material fact to that buyer, and it's up to us to discover material facts about the listings on behalf of our clients. But it circles back to, like, is replacing the sky in a listing with an inappropriately directioned setting sun, is that misleading? Do you think it is, Kelly?
I think it is.
Okay, so it's a weird one with the sky, because that it's not the blue that they use. You're like, oh my goodness, were they outside the ozone when they took this? Like, it is crisp, right? It's like, it feels winter fresh.
Almost like it should be obvious that it's
Right.
doctored.
So, but at the same token, when I do photos for people, when I do photos for myself, if there's a power line in that photo, I will not touch it. It is staying in there.
That is misleading.
Right.
Do you want to know something? When I do photos for other agents, I am working in the capacity as a photographer. And if they ask me to take those out, they have to, I tell you, look,
Right.
I'm a realtor too. I'm not taking those out of mine, but I'm working in the capacity as a photographer for you. And some people choose to snip those photo lines. Like, in fact, I've been called and blasted by the home sellers before.
Oh, wow.
Not of my own clients.
Yeah.
Of other people's clients who
Right.
will call. Because my clients, I'm like, look, I'm not changing it.
Right.
I'm not selling something that isn't real.
Right.
It has to be
Real.
because one deal is hardly worth my license.
Yeah, and
Okay.
there's also other complaints that I hear when you go into a house, especially when you get a call on your own listing, and people will say, "Wow, this room looked way bigger
Yeah.
online." Well, that's because you used a wider angle lens.
You
And
have to.
the tricky thing is, go into a room that's 9x9 and try and get 3 walls into a frame without using a
Without-
wide lens. You can't. It's impossible.
Yeah.
So yeah, they look a little bit funny, but that's the only way you can capture them, and it's not meant to be misleading. But where do you draw the line? Because
Okay, I've got
sorry,
it.
hang on 1 second.
Oh.
1 second. Sorry, hold your thought. Do you guys remember that photo of the house with the giant water tower in the back, and what they did? So it was like a house. And then immediately behind it was a huge water tower. I think it was in Australia somewhere. And what they did is they just walked closer to the house, used a wider angle lens so that the house blocked out this water tower.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
So like the Google Street View shows house and enormous water tower, but the real estate listing photo
Just shows the
showed
house.
no water tower. I'm going to try and find this photo and put it up on the video podcast so people can see what I'm talking about. But again, is that misleading? Does that
Yes.
create a situation where it's misleading? Like, you know what? Nothing's doctored. It's just
That's
the
thing.
angle.
It is misleading, but I don't know. They haven't done anything.
I was just
right?
going to say
Whereas-
that's still fair, I think, though, to
Do
do
you?
that.
I'm going to show
Okay.
you. I'll put it up on the podcast, and you guys can see it
I
later.
think that's fair.
It's
However,
ingenuous, but it's not.
assuming
Disingenuous?
Yeah, disingenuous.
Yes, it is
Yeah.
disingenuous. I think it's fair though. The reality is the buyer's going to go book a showing,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if they get there and see that there's a water
Yeah.
tower, and that's bothersome to them. Now, that absolutely could have been a problem when people would put offers on houses they had not seen.
Sight unseen, right?
Yes,
Yes.
and again, that's still buyer beware. And
I know.
But,
so when
yeah,
I'm a
it's more of
listing
an
agent
ethical
and I
problem
see
there.
a sight unseen offer, I immediately the
We
red
don't do
flags
it.
go up. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know if we should do this.
I've always told my sellers
Yeah, I
not
don't
to
like
deal with
it.
them personally.
I don't know if that's
Too
the
many
right
red flags.
advice or not, but like what?
It depends
happens?
on it. It depends a lot. Like if it's, hey, if it's got enough security in it, big deposit,
Yeah.
no
Mm-hmm.
wiggle room out,
Yeah.
no chance for recourse, that
Yep.
sort of stuff. Then I certainly would contemplate it. But yeah, I don't. Sometimes
scary.
It does. It certainly, because there becomes an issue then where yes, there is buyer beware. But because of our AREA code of ethics, okay, we're still bound to some degree. Okay, if you get a, let's say, you get an SPIS filled out. Okay,
That's a seller property information statement.
Okay, we don't use those in real estate much anymore, but we used to. And basically, it's a vendor disclosure that tells you all the problems of the property.
That's part of the
Okay.
problem is that it's not complete. But
It's
anyway,
not
yeah.
complete, but
It's
let's
the
say
most
you do
litigated
fill-
document in real estate, just so you know.
But let's say that you fill one of those out, okay? And you don't give it to, you need to make the buyer's agent aware that it's filled out.
That it exists.
Okay,
Yeah.
whereas, which is a weird, because if there's a latent defect in the house or a defect in the house and you've discovered it, you got to disclose it, obviously,
Yep.
right?
Right,
And that's
right.
what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You have to, same thing with this, you have to make them aware that that document is available.
Right.
Which is a strange sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't know. So realistically, is it misleading to some degree? But at the same token, there's an onus on both, and there is a disclosure interest that the listing agent will have to provide.
Absolutely.
In
That's
some
fair.
regards, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Do we need to check the time before I tell
No,
my
go
story?
ahead. You're good.
Okay, so I do have this brings up a point. So there was a house listed recently in Woodstock that said no rear neighbors. And I happen to know there's a planned subdivision behind. So
Kelly is an expert about city planning
I
matters.
I pay attention. So I called the listing agent to make sure she knew about the planned subdivision. And she said, we are aware about it, but it hasn't formally been approved yet to our knowledge. And I said, totally, it hasn't been. I just want to make sure you know, because I don't want to see you in litigation. This is a fabulous agent. I really like her.
And before you did that, the three of us talked about what we should do. Because
We
we kind
did.
of saw it's not an error, but we saw the message that was included in the MLS listing. We're like,
Is that
we know about this and our
Yeah.
buyers are going to know about this, but what should we reach out?
And I thought it's a super gray area, and the listing agent and I both agreed it's a very gray area because first of all, to do the best job for her sellers, advertising No Rear Neighbors absolutely is the most appealing in
it's
terms
a good
of
feature. Yeah.
it's a great feature. And the subdivision has not been formally approved. There's a 99% chance it's going to be approved,
Yeah.
but it's not approved. So, can you advertise No Rear Neighbors when you know something's coming in?
But-
Is the onus on the listing agent to disclose that something might happen, or is it on the buyer's agent to find out?
It is on the buyer's agent because they have
Yep.
that's their job. But again, this is an interesting ethical conundrum. How do you handle it?
Okay, so again, though, and I know we don't use the SBIS anymore, but if you remember, if this is going solely by memory, I haven't looked at one in 5 years.
One
or
of the
something
questions
like that.
is
One of the
about-
questions is actually, and the word is proposed.
Yes.
Yes.
It isn't. Is there any new
Are there any
subdivisions?
approved or proposed
Are there any
developments?
proposed
Proposed.
subdivisions?
Yeah.
That right there, even though we don't use that document anymore, that's the rule that should be followed in my mind. So you
Right.
sell. If I'm, I'd say that to my seller. Look, it's perhaps not advantageous for you that there's a possibility of this. Unfortunately, I'm not going to draw attention to it, but I'm also not going to draw whatever. I have to disclose it, but I'm not going to do a big song and dance
Yeah.
and say it's coming.
Yeah.
Okay?
I noticed what she ended up doing was changing the listings. Essentially, she just removed No Rear Neighbors.
Perfect, yeah.
And then
Which
in the
I think is the
realtor-
right thing to do.
Absolutely.
Again,
Yeah.
you could be argued either way that, there are no rear neighbors.
And there
we don't
aren't
know that it's approved.
now.
But if a buyer or their agent were to say, are you aware of any developments planned
Mm-hmm.
for the community or in the area, then the answer would be yes, we are
Yeah.
aware. You have to answer that truthfully.
She also-
And-
sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, she also put like a realtor comment in the realtor section. So on MLS listings, realtors have our own internal system that we look up, and we have notes that we can see that are not public. They're just for other realtors. And one of the things said, ask listing agent about planned subdivision,
That's good.
which I think was the best thing for her to do
Yep.
in that situation.
That covers her behind for any
Mm-hmm.
agents that come from out of market. And although we aren't supposed to be working for buyers or sellers in areas we aren't familiar with or aren't, we shouldn't be doing that. That at least covers her behind that she
yeah.
steered them in that direction.
Super gray area, though. We honestly, her and I had a great conversation
Yeah.
about it. I said, I don't know what the right answer is. I just wanted to make sure that you knew this was probably coming.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think it was the right answer. I
yeah.
don't think that there was.
And
I
I
also-
think as a listing agent, if you put something out and one of your peers calls you, that's a really nice, I think that's a nice gesture to be told about. I know that if I've taken a listing, I've done a few listings in Ingersoll, and I've had an agent or two actually contact me from Ingersoll and say, you need to fix this because blank. And I'm like, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's so nice of you for calling.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
And, I think, too, if I was buying that house as a buyer, I would just want to note that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would or would not impact me
it
buying
depends,
that
right?
house, especially
Yeah.
because at that price point, it was under 600,000, which is still moving really quickly. And realistically, it would sell with or without a subdivision behind it.
Yep.
But I think, it goes back to, I think the ethical thing to do for the public to bolster the opinion of realtors is to just disclose what we can in that type of situation.
Regardless if it will still sell, though, if you get a homeowner buy that, there are some people that as soon as they see that subdivision, their lawyer's on the horn.
Could be.
You got it. Like there's people going through, I think right now in Stratford going through on that. A few cases where there was something going in online.
I heard about
Agents came
that.
from out of town and they walked their clients
Yep.
right into a meat grinder. They're
So
like,
once
here,
again-
here we go.
So
Yeah.
once again, it's very important who you hire to help you.
Yeah.
Whether you're buying
especially
or
as
selling.
especially as a buyer's
Yeah.
agent, because it ultimately comes down to buyer beware, right? In that
So
situation.
this is all going to change though too. Like we're going to have to do some episodes on the upcoming changes in real estate. There's something called TRESA, which stands for the Trust in Real Estate Services Act.
yeah.
And that will be our new governing legislation very shortly. It was supposed to be April 1st. Now, by the time this podcast comes out, April 1st probably already passed, but
I think
it
it's
was
gonna be a
supposed
few months
It's
delayed.
been delayed, but it is going to fundamentally change the way a lot of this stuff works. And I think we should be talking about that stuff. I think we could break apart little pieces of it and
Yeah.
identify what's changing, how was it before, how's it going to be in the future, because it's a wholesale change as to how we're going to operate in
Yeah.
real estate coming forward.
Maybe one
We
of our
want
next
to put it in
podcasts.
tasty little bites.
Yes, little reelable snippets.
Yeah,
But it
that's
is going
right.
to change representation for buyers,
time.
and I think buyers. I think it's great for the industry as a whole because buyers will, I don't want to say be forced, but need to choose very early on in their home searching journey a realtor to work with exclusively.
Yeah, are they going it alone, like utterly
They
alone?
either can go
or are
at it
they
completely
getting help?
alone,
Yeah.
or they can have representation.
Yeah, because it's going to
And,
change the
yeah.
way we can help people who are unrepresented. It's going to completely change that.
I think it's
There's
good
also
overall.
another thing we should talk about too, which is that cooperation. What do they call that? The realtors' cooperation clause.
Yeah, there's a
about
couple
the
things.
exclusives.
Yes.
So that we're gonna have to vote on that. Basically, they're trying to eliminate exclusive listings.
Yes.
So an exclusive listing is when a real estate broker or a sales representative has a property listed for sale, but the intention is not to put it on the multiple listing service for whatever reason. And this legislation, or this little bit of a rule change, I guess it is designed so that if you publicly market a property for sale, if it's an exclusive listing, it has to go on the multiple listing service within 3 days.
Cool.
So that's basically going to put an end to exclusive listings. It's supposed to cut down on coming soons. And this was all born out of the fact that an agent would post coming soon to realtor.ca, and then they would get a sign call and they would sell that property to that buyer, and
Yeah.
it would never go on the market. And all the other buyers who might have been potentially interested in that property missed out on it.
And their clients missed out on a bigger paycheck.
Well, potentially.
Potentially.
So the legislature, the verbiage that's coming out of our governing bodies is all about, well, it should be that sellers need to understand that the MLS is where they get the most money, and it serves to benefit them, but really I feel it's a little bit self-preserving for the real estate business. It also limits choice. So I think there's a debate to be had about this legislation. We have to vote on it sometime in April. So next podcast we're going to
We'll
talk
talk
more
about it
about
more.
that. Yeah.
All right.
This is a little
We're
intro.
going to have more coffee.
Yes, I am officially out of coffee, and I'm also officially out of time. So thanks very much for
Thank
watching.
you guys for
Cool.
listening
Thanks,
or
guys.
watching.
Yeah,
Entertain
awesome.
everybody.
Have
Good
a great
job, guys.
day.
All right, see ya.
Let's throw ya.